I didn't know the memo existed until 6:14 a.m., when Danielle, my head of finance, Slack called me with a tremor in her voice I'd never heard before. I was still in the office from the night before, the smell of stale coffee clinging to my clothes, the air conditioning humming just loud enough to make the silence unbearable. My eyes were burning from staring at our snowflake dashboards too long, but her voice cut straight through the fog. "Alexis, you need to see something, right now." I felt my stomach cinch. What happened? She hesitated, just long enough to make my chest tighten, then said, "One of our portfolio analysts forwarded me a document by mistake. It's about you." I remember the cold prickle at the back of my neck, the way the aluminum of my laptop felt suddenly too smooth under my fingertips as she dropped the PDF into Slack. The file name alone made my pulse spike. Leadership stability, concerns, CEO assessment, confidential. I clicked. The words blurred for a second before they came into focus: emotional volatility, difficulty managing pressure, erratic decision patterns, and the one that made my throat close: not well suited for long-term leadership. Each phrase was attributed to Brad and Simon, two board members who'd smiled in my face just 72 hours earlier during our revenue review, telling me they were fully aligned with our Series B timeline. My hands went numb as I scrolled. The deeper I read, the worse it got. Fabricated citations, false team concerns, invented examples of me struggling to present coherent strategy. A line so absurd I almost laughed: CEO exhibited visible emotional instability during March all hands. That all hands, where I calmly walked the team through our new anomaly detection model, emotional instability really. My vision tunneled. A metallic taste spread across my tongue as I hit the end of the memo and saw the real nightmare: a recommendation to explore transitional leadership options prior to valuation discussions. They were trying to replace me. Not because I'd failed, not because growth was down or retention was slipping. Our ARR was up 47% quarter over quarter. Churn was the lowest it had been in 2 years. Our burn rate was healthy. Our pipeline for the upcoming quarter was the strongest in company history. No, this wasn't about performance. This was about control. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling tiles, listening to the HVAC rattle as if the whole building was vibrating with me. Danielle's voice crackled through my headphones. "Alexis, are you still there?" "I'm here," I whispered, though my throat was tight. "Send me the analyst's email and the metadata on the file." She exhaled shakily. "I already pulled it, timestamped 2 nights ago, and Alexis, it was forwarded to 3 major funds." A sharp, burning heat rose from my chest to my jaw. 3 funds. 3 potential Series B leads. They were poisoning the well before negotiations even began. I closed my eyes, breathing slow, steady, controlled breaths. I couldn't react, not yet. Not until I understood every angle, every lie, every manipulation stitched into that memo. Investors thought I was emotional. Fine, I'd show them what data-driven fury looked like. And as I reopened the PDF, something caught my eye, something small, almost invisible, wedged in a paragraph about our predictive modeling accuracy. A number, a percentage. And it was wrong. Not just wrong, impossible. My breath hitched. If that number was fabricated, what else had they changed? I clicked back to Snowflake, fingers trembling over the keyboard. And that's when I found the first discrepancy. The office was still dark when I stepped into the hallway, the carpet muffling my footsteps as I tried to slow my breathing. That fabricated percentage kept replaying in my mind like a glitching loop. It didn't make sense, not unless someone wanted it wrong. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead as I slipped into the small glass conference room across from my office, the one with the drafty window that always let in a faint smell of the bakery downstairs. I sank into the cold leather chair and let myself drift back, because the moment I saw that wrong number, I remembered the first time I met Brad and Simon, back when I thought I was being given real partners. It was 4 years ago, at a networking event in Soma. I remember standing awkwardly near the coffee station in my navy blazer, clutching a lukewarm paper cup because it gave my hands something to do. I was 35 then, still feeling the weight of being a black woman in rooms where everyone else seemed to glide between conversations effortlessly. Brad approached first, tall, sandy-haired, Patagonia vest over a crisp white shirt, holding a kombucha he pronounced kombucha, like it was an exotic discovery he'd made personally. He smiled the kind of smile that made you feel examined. "You're Alexis Grant, right? Predictify AI," he said. I nodded. "That's me." "I've heard interesting things," he replied. "Predictive analytics for enterprise risk modeling, ambitious." He said ambitious, like he wasn't sure it was a compliment. Before I could answer, Simon showed up, shorter, round glasses, expensive watch, a habit of rubbing the bridge of his nose before asking a question. "I saw your talk," he said. "Your anomaly detection model, bold assumptions, but promising." I remember laughing lightly, nerves buzzing. Bold is usually code for you didn't think it would work. He smirked. "You proved otherwise." They spent the next 20 minutes asking about our seed round, our retention metrics, our burn rate. Their attention felt flattering then, two high-profile investors actually interested in something I'd built from scratch. I still remember the exact moment I let myself trust them when Brad said, "We don't invest in founders we don't believe in. And we believe in you." I believed him. Later that night, after 2 glasses of mediocre red wine and too many handshakes, I walked out onto Market Street with a warm feeling in my chest, thinking I'd found allies who respected me, respected the vision, respected the work. My first mistake. Even then, there'd been a sign. I remembered it suddenly, how during that conversation Brad had asked about my CTO, and when I answered, he tilted his head and said, "You're very passionate. Good founders are. But passion needs to be guided, you know." Passionate. Emotional. The words had been interchangeable to men like him. A chill crept up my spine as I stared at the conference room wall, replaying that moment with new clarity. The wrong number in the memo wasn't an accident. They knew exactly what they were doing. Just as I reached for my laptop to cross-check more figures, my phone buzzed. A text from Simon, "We need to talk this afternoon." My jaw tightened. Of course he did. And for the first time, I wondered just how long they'd been planning this. The sun was barely up when I reopened the memo, the blue glow from my laptop reflecting against the glass wall like a second, harsher light. I scrolled slowly this time, forcing myself to absorb every number, every claim, every subtle twist of language crafted to make me look incompetent. Predictify AI's accuracy rate plateaued. Client churn increasing. Revenue expansion unstable. All of it false, and all of it delivered with the confidence of men who assumed no one would dare question them. I pulled up our Snowflake dashboard again, the familiar interface grounding me with its clean white grids and teal highlights. A faint hum from the HVAC vibrated through the room. My hands were steadier now as I navigated to the accuracy history for our anomaly detection model. The real rate 93.4%. The memo claimed 78%. My pulse kicked up again. That wasn't a misunderstanding, that was sabotage. I typed a quick query, pulling the last 6 months of retention metrics. The memo listed 12% churn, reality 3.7%. I felt a sharp jolt of anger travel through me, hot and fast. I clenched my jaw until my teeth ached. If numbers this basic were fabricated, they'd gone all in. They weren't painting me as incompetent, they were painting the company as unstable, undermining valuation. Positioning themselves to bring in a more seasoned CEO at a discounted Series B. My stomach dropped. This wasn't just character assassination. This was a takeover. I clicked into Confluence to scan our internal strategy notes. Something else bugged me, the language in the memo. Under pressure, CEO loses clarity, struggles to articulate metrics. These weren't just opinions. They mirrored phrases I'd heard Brad use during board reviews. My mind flashed to 3 moments in the last year, moments I'd brushed off at the time. There was the Q4 board meeting when I challenged Simon's suggestion to pivot toward SMB clients. He'd leaned back, arms crossed, and said, "Alexis, you're overreacting. We're brainstorming, don't be so rigid." The room had gone quiet. I'd smoothed my skirt, pretending his tone didn't sting. And the time, 9 months ago, when Brad dismissed my concerns about his aggressive revenue projections. "You're thinking too small," he'd said, tapping the table. "Let me handle the investor narrative. You focus on the product, it's what you're good at." Then there was the day, not even 3 weeks ago, when I'd pushed back on their pressure to hire a COO I didn't trust, one Brad had conveniently worked with before. Afterward, he'd said, "You seemed a little emotional in that meeting. Everything okay?" I remembered blinking at him, stunned, unsure whether I'd misheard. Emotional for asking basic operational questions. I hadn't realized then that he was planting seeds. I'd been rationalizing it all, telling myself I was being sensitive, that maybe I was coming off too strong. That internal voice, soft, doubting, had been whispering that I needed to balance perception. A whisper I recognized all too well as the survival instinct of every Black woman who's ever been judged before she even opened her mouth. But now, looking at falsified churn rates and invented leadership critiques, the fog of self-doubt burned off. They'd been setting this up. My phone buzzed again, this time a Slack message from Danielle. "There's more. I found something in the revenue sheet. Call me." My throat tightened. More. I stood, chair legs scraping lightly against the floor, and grabbed my laptop. I had no idea what else they'd doctored. But I knew one thing for certain: this was only the beginning. Danielle answered on the first ring, her voice hushed like she was afraid someone might be listening, even though it was barely 7 a.m. and the office was still half asleep. I paced the small conference room, sunlight beginning to bleed through the window, warming the glass but not my skin. "Okay," she said, breath unsteady. "I triple-checked before calling you. This isn't a rounding error. It's not a syncing issue. Someone manually altered the revenue sheet." My grip tightened around the phone. "Altered how?" "You know that enterprise renewal from Metatron Labs, the $2.8 million deal we closed at the end of March?" I nodded, heart thudding. That renewal was one of our biggest wins of the quarter, the reason our expansion revenue looked so strong. "In our internal sheet," she said, "it's listed as $1.4 million. The air left my lungs in one sharp exhale. "Half." "Half," she confirmed, and the delta was logged under adjustments due to client pushback. Except there was no client pushback. I spoke with their procurement director yesterday. They're thrilled with us. My pulse hammered. Someone had cut our biggest contract in half, intentionally, and if it was in the revenue sheet. "Check the ARR roll forward," I whispered. "I did," she replied. "It gets worse." The room tilted. I braced a hand against the cold surface of the conference table, closing my eyes for half a second. "Show me." A moment later, my screen lit up with a Google Sheets notification. I clicked the link, and there it was, our most critical financial tracker, the one investors always asked for first during diligence. Except this version didn't look like the sheet I reviewed weekly. Line items shifted. Monthly recurring revenue down by nearly 18%. Expansion revenue stalled. Pipeline quality downgraded from strong to moderate. Whoever modified it had been careful. Too careful. The changes were subtle enough that someone glancing quickly could believe them, but massive enough to completely distort our growth story. My chest tightened painfully. "Who has edit access?" I asked. Danielle didn't answer right away. I heard her clicking, papers rustling. When she finally spoke, her tone was grim. "You're not going to like this." "Tell me." "Only 3 people touched this sheet in the last 30 days, she said. "You, me, and Brad." A cold shock ran through me, as if someone had poured ice water down my spine. "What about Simon?" "He has view access only," she replied, but she paused. "What?" "There's metadata showing the sheet was exported and re-uploaded. Twice. From a shared drive only board members use." My fingers tingled. I sat down slowly, eyes scanning the revision log, every cell now feeling like evidence in a crime scene. Why would he touch this? Why would he risk altering core financials before a raise? Danielle exhaled softly, "To tank the valuation." And there it was, the truth hitting me like a punch to the ribs. If they made the company look unstable. If they convinced other investors I wasn't fit to lead. If they depressed our valuation enough. They could justify replacing me with someone compliant, someone they controlled, and scoop up a bigger ownership stake in the process. I pressed a hand to my jaw, heat building behind my eyes, not tears, not grief, something sharper. Send me the full revision history, I said. All of it. Export logs too. She hesitated. Alexis, are you okay? No, I said honestly, but I don't think they are either. And as I opened the next file, one I hadn't touched in months, I felt something shift inside me. Not fear, not outrage. Resolve. Because if they wanted a war built on numbers, metadata, and evidence, they'd forgotten who built this company. And I had just started digging. Danielle's packet of revision logs sat open in one tab while I flipped through the investor memo again, my pulse tapping against my throat like a second heartbeat. The two documents mirrored each other, two perfectly fabricated churn here, leadership instability there, downgraded pipeline here, CEO lacks strategic clarity there. It wasn't sloppy. It wasn't rushed. It was orchestrated. And the worst part, my first attempts to raise the alarm went nowhere. I reached out to outside counsel first. Mark, the partner who'd helped us set up our Delaware C-Corp 3 years ago, picked up on the third ring. I could picture him already, tie loosened, reading glasses pushed up, coffee breath warm through the line. Alexis, he said, voice groggy but carefully neutral. What's going on? I paced the back hallway of the office, the one lit only by the faint blue glow of emergency lights, the scent of old carpet heavy in the air. I need to ask you something hypothetical, I said. Hypothetical, he repeated like a warning. If a board member knowingly distributes false financials to prospective investors to justify removing a CEO, what are the legal implications? Silence, long, uncomfortable silence. Alexis, he finally said, be very careful what you're implying. I'm not implying anything. I'm asking about scenario analysis. That scenario, he replied, is extremely serious, but you'd need hard evidence, not assumptions, not inferences, and certainly not feelings. Feelings. The word made my jaw clench so tight my teeth ached. Mark, I said slowly, what if I do have evidence? He exhaled. If you're asking me to take sides in a governance dispute, I can't, not without the board's consent. A spike of disbelief cut through me. The board's consent, the board members falsifying the documents. Allegedly, he said quickly. And until you can show irrefutable proof, my advice is to tread lightly. If you accuse investors without airtight backing, it could destabilize your position further. Further, I echoed, meaning what? He hesitated. Off the record, there's chatter, some concerns about leadership continuity. My stomach dropped. You've seen the memo. His silence was all the confirmation I needed. I hung up without saying goodbye. For a moment I stood alone in the dim hallway, the cool air from the vent brushing my cheeks, the metallic taste creeping back into my mouth. My lawyer, was too afraid of the board to even advise me. The message was clear: proceed at your own risk. I must have been standing there longer than I realized, because my phone buzzed again. My sister. Lex, she said the moment I answered. You sound weird, what's going on? I pressed a hand to my forehead, staring at the faint reflection of myself in the dark window, eyes shadowed, lips pressed thin. Nothing, I'm just dealing with some investor stuff. You're lying, she said gently. Your voice gets flat when you're scared. I blinked hard. I'm not scared. You're terrified. I didn't answer, I couldn't. Please eat something, she said, and breathe. Whatever this is, you don't have to handle it alone. Except I did. No one was coming to save me. Every avenue I turned to was blocked by loyalty, by conflict, by fear. After we hung up, I went straight to my office and pulled up the board communication portal. I crafted a careful message requesting an emergency meeting. Within minutes, the replies trickled in. Aaron, let's wait for clarity before escalating concerns. Brad, happy to discuss at our scheduled meeting next week. Simon, no need for urgency. Everything is under control. Under control. I felt something inside me harden. They wanted me calm, quiet, uncertain. But I wasn't uncertain anymore. I couldn't rely on lawyers, or the board, or investor goodwill. I couldn't rely on anyone who cared more about protecting themselves than protecting the truth. I needed someone who understood systems, someone who understood manipulation, someone who understood me. Someone I'd avoided calling for almost a year. I opened my messages and typed the only person I knew could help. Me need a friend, not official, you available tonight. 3 dots appeared almost instantly. Riley, bring coffee, this sounds like a long one. Relief hit me so hard my knees went weak. I stood, grabbed my laptop, and headed for the exit. If the board wanted a war of data, I was done playing defense. Riley answered her door before I even knocked, her hair in a messy puff, hoodie half-zipped, glasses sliding down her nose. The apartment smelled like burnt espresso and solder, exactly like it always had when we pulled all-nighters during the early days of Predictify AI. She looked at me for a long second, her eyes scanning mine, and her expression softened. Who fucked you over? She asked. The words hit me so fast and clean that my throat tightened. I stepped inside, setting 2 large coffees on her cluttered kitchen island. A monitor glowed from the living room floor, cables looping like vines. She kicked aside a pile of circuit boards and motioned for me to sit. You look like hell, she added, not unkindly. I feel worse. She didn't say anything, just folded onto the couch across from me, cross-legged, laptop already open. Start talking. A breath shuddered out of me. Brad and Simon are circulating a memo about me, calling me unstable, too emotional to lead. They're falsifying numbers, revenue, churn, accuracy rates, preparing justification to replace me before the Series B. Her eyes sharpened, fingers pausing mid-keystroke. You're serious? I opened my folder of PDFs, spreadsheets, revision logs, email forwards. When I slid my laptop across the coffee table, my hands trembled, not from fear anymore, but from weeks of carrying something too heavy alone. Riley leaned forward, the light from the monitor washing sharp angles across her face. She scrolled silently, her brow furrowing deeper with every page. Jesus, Alexis, this is coordinated. I know. No, she said, voice dropping. Coordinated, like premeditated, they didn't just wake up petty one day. I looked down, rubbing my thumb against the smooth aluminum edge of my laptop. I tried reporting it. Legal won't touch it. The board won't listen. They think I'm overreacting. She snorted, convenient. They've been planting seeds for months, I murmured. Little comments, questions about my leadership style, pushing hires I didn't want, acting like they're protecting the company from me. Riley pushed her glasses up, inhaling sharply. Show me everything. All logs, all edits, all exports, all metadata. My shoulders dropped. Relief, finally, after days of tension twisting like wire inside me. She wasn't dismissing me. She wasn't telling me to calm down. She wasn't saying I was imagining things. She believed me. I watched her pull the files into a mirrored environment, her fingers flying across the keyboard in rapid staccato. The room filled with the soft hum of fans, the faint smell of warm circuitry, the tapping of keys echoing like steady rain. Okay, she said, adjusting her posture. See this? She pointed to a timestamp in the revision log. There's a 2-minute gap here. That means the sheet wasn't just edited, it was duplicated, scrubbed, re-uploaded. My pulse quickened. By who? She zoomed in, isolating a device signature. This is a MacBook, but not yours, not Danielle's. Another tap. Serial number ending in 7QH. My breath caught. Brad uses a MacBook Pro with a 7QH suffix. Riley nodded grimly. Thought so, she kept digging. And here, Slack export. Looks like Simon forwarded part of the memo to a fund partner before it was finalized. Before, I echoed. She met my eyes, meaning they planned the memo, then fabricated the numbers to match. My chest constricted, not with fear this time, but a growing, steady fury. Riley sat back, hands steepled. This isn't just shady, This is illegal. Fiduciary breach, investor fraud, hell, maybe even securities violations depending on who they sent this to. My breath came shallow and sharp. So what do we do? She leaned forward, eyes fierce. Simple, we build an airtight timeline. Logs, metadata, document history, Slack exports, email forwarding chains. Then we present it to the only people more terrifying to investors than a CEO they underestimate. A shiver ran through me. Who? A slow smile curved across her lips. Regulators. My entire body went cold and hot at once. Alexis, she said quietly, firmly, we're going to nail them, but we do it right. A beat of silence settled between us, thick, heavy, electric. I nodded. Tomorrow, the trap would begin. Riley's living room became our war room for the next 2 weeks. I don't think either of us slept more than 4 hours at a time. The place smelled like burnt espresso, takeout noodles, and warm laptop fans. Sheets of scratch paper carpeted the floor, flowcharts, timestamps, arrows connecting dates to actions, scribbled phrases like fiduciary breach and intentional misrepresentation. Every hour of every day felt like holding an electrical wire with bare hands, constant current, constant risk, constant focus. During the days, I went to the office and pretended everything was normal. I smiled during morning stand-up. I joined product syncs. I nodded through meetings where Brad casually asked if I'd reconsider bringing on that COO he pushed. I kept my voice even, my posture calm, my hands in my lap so no one could see how tightly I curled my fingers into fists. And every time I walked past Brad, I felt the lie of that investor memo burn behind my ribs. Emotional. Unstable. Not suited for long-term leadership. If only he knew the discipline it took not to explode. Keep the facade, Riley had said. If they sense you know, they'll start covering tracks. So I did. I became someone I barely recognized, controlled, precise, silent. Inside, though, I was a live wire. At night, I brought coffee to Riley's apartment and sat cross-legged on her rug while she unearthed the truth layer by layer. One night, she pointed at her screen and said, "Look at this email thread between Brad and Simon." My throat tightened as I read it. She's too distracted to notice. If we adjust the Q1 numbers, the narrative writes itself. The board will thank us when valuation stabilizes under new leadership. My vision went white around the edges. They wrote this like I'm not a human being. Riley's jaw clenched. They wrote this like they own you. Another night, she traced a pattern in the revenue sheet revisions. These adjustments weren't random. Look, each one aligns to a specific talking point in their memo. They engineered data to justify their story. A cold wave washed over me. They planned the story first, then falsified the numbers afterward. She nodded slowly. That's conspiracy, and it's provable. We built the trap with surgical precision. A mirrored environment that tracked every new move they made. A comprehensive evidence packet with metadata signatures, device IDs, file origin traces. A spreadsheet mapping each falsified KPI to their internal correspondence. A separate folder for regulatory bodies, SEC, state business oversight committees, the institutional LPs who policed investor misconduct. Every night, Riley would sit back, stretch her spine, and say, "They think you'll confront them angry, unprepared, emotional. We're going to confront them with facts sharp enough to draw blood." The day before we were ready, she closed her laptop with a soft click. "Everything's in place. One more step, we need a real-time capture, something they can't deny." A tremor traveled down my spine. Meaning? "You go in tomorrow," she said. "Act normal. Ask a question only they can answer, something tied to a falsified metric. Won't they deflect?" She smiled thinly. "That's what we're counting on." That night, as I lay awake staring at the ceiling, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Calm. Controlled. Ready. At 6 a.m., I texted her one word, "ready." She replied with one back recording. Tomorrow morning, the confrontation would begin. And I had no intention of losing. I barely slept, but when I walked into the office that morning, I felt unnervingly steady, like the center of a storm that had finally learned it wasn't the one being blown around. The hallway lights buzzed faintly overhead. Someone had left a mug of burnt coffee in the sink, the sour smell drifting through the kitchenette. I could feel my heartbeat in my fingertips, but my face stayed still, neutral, unreadable. Brad arrived first, humming as he scrolled through his phone, Patagonia vest zipped up like armor. He didn't even glance at me when he passed my office. Simon followed a few minutes later, tapping a Slack message into his phone, eyes darting up with that faux-friendly smile. "Alexis," he said, "you're in early." "Lots to do," I replied, voice smooth. He nodded, oblivious. This was it. I stood, smoothing my blazer, and walked into the hallway. "Brad, Simon, can you both step into my office for a second?" They exchanged a look, quick, silent, calculating, but followed me in. I closed the door behind them. The soft click of the latch sounded like a trigger being pulled. "Is something wrong?" Brad asked, lowering himself into a chair. "You look focused," I said. "We need to review some numbers." He hesitated. "Now?" "Yes," I replied, "now." The tension shifted immediately. I walked to my desk, pulled up a clean dashboard, and projected it onto the wall monitor. My hands didn't shake, not anymore. "I found discrepancies," I said. "Big ones, beginning with our accuracy rate." I clicked to the metric. "Our true rate is 93.4%, but you reported 78% in the memo you distributed." A flicker crossed Brad's face. Simon blinked twice. "Memo," Brad echoed. "What memo?" "Exchange one." "Me, the one titled Leadership Stability Concerns. The one sent to Larchmont, Palo Alto Partners, and Harbor Point." "Brad, I think you're mistaken. That wasn't circulated widely." "Me, interesting choice of the word, was." "Exchange two." "Simon, we were simply raising concerns." "Alexis, standard governance." "Me, governance doesn't include falsifying numbers." "Exchange three." "Brad, no one falsified anything. You're interpreting." "Me, interpretation doesn't change metadata. Let's continue." I switched to the revenue sheet. Their bodies stiffened in tandem. "Here," I said, "the Metatron renewal. Actual $2.8 million. Reported $1.4 million. Exchange 4. "Simon, that must have been an accounting oversight." "Me, you annotated it as client pushback. I confirmed with their procurement director. No pushback." Exchange 5. "Brad, you're being emotional." "Me, I'm being accurate." He swallowed. I pulled up the export log next. "These two exports were made from your MacBook, Brad, Serial 7QH. They were re-uploaded to a private board drive. You then forwarded the modified version to Simon." Exchange 6. "Brad, you can't prove intent." "Me, I don't need to. The timeline does." Exchange 7. "Simon, Alexis, let's slow down. This reaction is exactly why we're concerned." "Me, finish that sentence. I dare you." He didn't. Exchange 8. "Brad, look, if we miscommunicated something, let's fix it internally." "Me, you didn't miscommunicate. You orchestrated." Exchange 9. "Simon, you're blowing this out of proportion." "Me, you reduced core KPIs to justify removing me before the Series B. That's not proportion. That's conspiracy." Exchange 10. "Brad, we acted in the company's best interest." "Me, no, you acted in your own." I let the silence hang until the air felt thick enough to touch. Then I turned toward the door, because I felt her before I saw her. Riley stepped into the doorway, phone in hand, her expression carved from ice. "Everything's recorded," she said. Brad shot to his feet. "What you can't." Exchange 11. "Riley, I announced I was recording before entering. California law satisfied." "Brad, this is entrapment." "Me, no, this is documentation." Exchange 12. "Simon, Alexis, let's be rational." "Me, rational, you falsified numbers. and circulated a memo calling me unstable. I'm being more rational than you deserve. Their faces shifted, first anger, then fear, then something brittle and desperate underneath both. I picked up a folder from my desk, neatly tabbed, printed, time-stamped. Inside this packet, I said, are every revision you made, every metadata signature, every export, every Slack message, and every email used to undermine this company and my leadership. Neither of them breathed. And as of 10 minutes ago, I said softly, the board has received it too. The blood drained from Brad's face in real time. Simon's hands went slack at his sides. Gentlemen, I said, stepping back, you didn't just lose this play. I opened the door wide. You lost everything. Their world collapsed in their eyes before a single word left their mouths. The moment they stepped out of my office, shaken, silent, their confidence cracked like thin ice, I forwarded the evidence packet to the full board, not the sanitized version, the real one. Metadata, device signatures, email chains, Slack exports, revenue sheet tampering, every deliberate misrepresentation mapped to their own words. Within minutes, replies started pinging my inbox, short, clipped messages from people suddenly realizing the ground they were standing on was no longer solid. By the time the emergency board meeting began at noon, the atmosphere in the conference room felt electric and volatile, like stepping into a storm cell. The long mahogany table gleamed under the overhead lights. The faint scent of printer toner hung in the air. My pulse ticked steadily, calmly, like I'd trained it to. The chair, Priya, adjusted her blazer and looked around the room. Let's get started. Brad and Simon sat at opposite ends of the table, their bodies rigid, shoulders tight, eyes refusing to meet mine. They looked smaller somehow, men who'd lived their entire professional lives assuming rooms would bend around them, now realizing the room had stopped listening. Priya turned to me first. Alexis, walk us through what you found. I stood, opened my laptop, and projected the timeline Riley and I had built. Clean, precise, undeniable. 3 weeks ago, I began, an investor analyst accidentally forwarded me a memo prepared by Brad and Simon regarding my leadership. In that memo, they included inaccurate KPIs, falsified metrics, and statements attributed to team members that were never made. I clicked to the accuracy slide, real 93.4%, fabricated 78%. First discrepancy, I said. This number was changed to support the memo's claim that our core model performance had plateaued. The room stayed silent, except for the soft whir of the HVAC. Next slide churn, real 3.7%, reported 12%. Next Metatron renewal, real $2.08 M, reduced to 1.4 M. Next pipeline downgrades. Then timestamps, device signatures, export logs, direct messages that showed intent. Priya leaned forward, eyes narrowing. Brad, is this your device signature? He swallowed. I don't recall making those edits. It was your laptop, I said softly. Twice, 2 separate export events, both followed by upload events to a private board drive. A murmur rippled through the room, investors shifting, crossing arms, exchanging looks. And Simon, Priya said, turning, why did you forward a draft memo to outside funds before board review? Simon wiped his palms on his slacks. We were initiating early diligence, standard practice. Not with false numbers, I replied. Priya nodded slowly. Continue, Alexis. I moved to the email thread Riley found, the one where they planned the manipulation. Heads of narrative, I said, their words, not mine. One board member, Ken, rubbed his forehead. This is catastrophic. Brad jolted upright. This is being blown out of proportion. We were protecting the company. By lying, I asked. By stabilizing the message, he snapped. By falsifying KPIs, Priya corrected coldly. Let's call it what it is. He opened his mouth, then shut it. The shift was palpable. The board wasn't defending them anymore. I clicked to the final slide, our real numbers. Clean, strong, stable. The company I built. This is the truth, I said. This is what they tried to bury. Priya sat back, exhaling slowly. Then she lifted her eyes and swept them across the table. All in favor of removing Brad and Simon from their board positions and initiating an external investigation. Her voice didn't need to finish. Hands went up, everyone except theirs. The vote was unanimous. Brad let out a harsh breath, his face flushing a mottled red. "You'll regret this, Alexis." I met his gaze evenly. "I regret trusting you, that's all." Simon stood abruptly, chair scraping. "This wasn't personal." "It was survival," I said quietly, "and you lost." Security was called to escort them out, not dramatic, not loud, just firm and final. Watching them walk down the hallway they used to command with smug confidence, it felt surreal, not triumphant, not satisfying. Just necessary. When the door finally shut behind them, Priya turned back to me. "You saved this company," she said. "And you saved our integrity. Send me the full packet. We will self-report before they can attempt anything else." Relief didn't wash over me, not yet. It lingered at a distance, like something waiting at the edge of a long, dark tunnel, but the weight on my chest eased slightly as I nodded. It was over. Or at least their part was. But the fallout was just beginning. The hours after the vote felt like walking out of a burning building, my body still braced for impact even as the danger receded behind me. I stayed in the conference room long after the board dispersed, staring at the stack of printed evidence on the table. The paper edges were sharp beneath my fingertips, grounding me in a reality that still didn't feel real. Outside the glass walls, the office moved with cautious normalcy. Someone laughed near the kitchen. A Slack notification pinged. The elevator dinged. All the familiar sounds of a company that had no idea how close it had come to being gutted. Priya stopped by before leaving. "We've notified council," she said, "and the LPs will issue a formal statement once the investigation is underway." I nodded, my voice still felt lodged somewhere in my chest. "Thank you." "This should never have happened," she added. The regret in her eyes was real. "We failed to notice what they were doing." I forced a small exhale. "They were careful." "They were conniving," she corrected, "and they underestimated the wrong person." When she left, the silence crept back in like fog. Half an hour later, HR emailed confirmation Brad and Simon's access was fully suspended, their accounts deactivated, their badges revoked. The same system they used to undermine me now locked them out with cold efficiency. I should have felt victorious. I didn't. My hands were still trembling. A knock sounded. I glanced up to see Aaron, the board member who told me to wait for clarity, hovering at the doorway. "Alexis," he said softly, "can we talk?" I gestured for him to sit, though every muscle in my body tightened. He lowered himself into a chair, smoothing his tie nervously. "I owe you an apology." I raised an eyebrow. "For what?" "For not listening, for doubting you, for believing them," he swallowed. "I didn't think they'd go this far." A bitter, exhausted laugh slipped from me. Most people never think powerful men will go that far, until they do. He winced. "If there's anything I can do to rebuild trust." "Do your job," I said, objectively, without assuming I'm the problem before I've even spoken. He nodded, chastened. "You have my word." When he left, I finally allowed myself to sag back in my chair, head tipping toward the ceiling. The hum of fluorescent lights filled the room. My limbs felt heavy, like the adrenaline that had been propping me up for 2 weeks had suddenly dissolved. By late afternoon, the first ripple of external consequences began. A VP at Harbor Point emailed asking for a call to clarify unexpected discrepancies reported by former board members. Metatron's CIO requested assurance that recent leadership transitions do not affect service continuity. Our PR consultant sent a cautious message: "Is everything stable?" And then there was the most surreal moment. My LinkedIn feed showing Brad's profile updated within an hour of the vote, seeking new opportunities. No board role listed. No affiliation. No confidence. He was already being erased by the very ecosystem that once rewarded him. The same thing happened to Simon by dusk. His bio was scrubbed clean. Their playground had abandoned them the moment they stopped being useful. I closed my laptop, rubbing my temples as the office emptied out around me. My reflection stared back from the darkened window, tired, worn down but still standing, and for the first time in weeks, I let myself breathe a full breath. It was over. Mostly. But the real rebuilding, the slow, painful climb back to trust, stability, and clarity, was about to begin. The first week after their removal felt like living inside a long exhale. Not relief exactly, more like the moment after a storm when the sky is still gray, debris still scattered, but the wind finally calms enough for you to hear your own heartbeat again. I spent most of those days in back-to-back meetings with counsel, with the board, with regulators, with clients, with staff who sensed something had happened but didn't know the scale. Then came the depositions. 8 months, my life became a rotating carousel of conference rooms, video calls, document uploads, and long days sitting across from attorneys who treated every question like a scalpel. The first deposition with Brad's counsel lasted 6.5 hours. The room smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and old carpet. The air conditioner blew too cold across my shoulders. I kept my back straight, my hands folded neatly in my lap, my voice even as they asked the same questions 10 different ways. Did you at any time express emotional distress during board meetings? Did you feel overwhelmed by leadership responsibilities? Would you characterize your reaction to the memo as disproportionate? I answered each one calmly, but inside, a small part of me flinched every time they tried to reduce me to a stereotype. Riley sat behind me, silent but steady, tapping her pen against her notebook in slow, deliberate beats. When they presented a printed copy of the falsified metrics, she leaned forward just enough for me to catch her whisper. "They're cornered, stay steady." And I did. By month 3, Marcus, the investigator assigned by the SEC, told us privately, "Their timeline contradicts itself. If this goes to settlement, it'll favor you." His voice was quiet, almost apologetic, like he knew how exhausting justice could be. Meanwhile, the company didn't pause for my healing. It couldn't. Predictify AI had to be rebuilt, not from scratch but from fractures. I spent nights revising policies, strengthening controls, implementing a mandatory audit trail for financial edits, reworking access permissions, rewriting executive communication standards. I hired a new CFO, a calm, brilliant black woman named Layla who audited every sheet in our system and said, gently but firmly, "This won't happen again." Not on my watch. We closed our Series B 6 months later. $10.4 million. Higher valuation than the one Brad and Simon tried to sabotage. When I got the term sheet, I sat alone in my office with the lights off, listening to the soft hum of the HVAC and the distant click of someone typing outside. My chest tightened, not in fear this time, but something heavier, something like grief, because even triumph has weight. Late one night, after our funding announcement went live, I saw Brad's final update consulting work for a mid-tier analytics shop in Denver. No board seats, no equity listings, no capital raises. His LinkedIn activity was hidden now, a digital quiet that said more than any headline. Simon didn't fare better. Word spread through the investor grapevine that he'd been quietly removed from 2 more boards after internal issues. The ecosystem that had protected them for so long had finally done what it does best, self-corrected when the liability outweighed the loyalty. I didn't celebrate, I didn't feel vindicated. I just felt the reality of it settle. Some nights, even now, I still wake at 3 a.m., heart pounding, mind racing, convinced I've missed something in a spreadsheet or a log file. Trauma doesn't leave when the danger does. It lingers like a shadow in the corner of a room you know is safe. But then I remember Riley sitting across from me in her living room, saying, "Who fucked you over?" I remember Priya raising her hand first during the vote. I remember Layla's calm voice, "This won't happen again." I remember the strength in my own voice the moment I said, "You acted in your own interest, not the company's." And I breathe. Because I survived, because I fought, because I trusted my own clarity even when no one else did. And if you've stayed with me through this, if you've ever been dismissed as too emotional, While someone tried to undermine the brilliance you built, then you already understand why I had to tell it. Knowing I wasn't alone in that truth, that's what kept me standing on the nights I couldn't sleep. Thank you.